Hello and welcome to True Crime Tuesday. Especially welcome if you're new, but welcome back if you're not. You're here now, which is kind of starting to maybe look like a thing, kind of. Oh, and by the way, this is my knee. Sorry, I can't sit like a normal human in a chair. If you have been here before, you know the drill. I apologize in advance for any sounds that come from my house. I do not live by myself. Penny got a new toy today. She's out there chewing on it. It's very loud. At least I can hear it in here. I don't know if you guys can, so if you can, I'm sorry. Here's the mic, safely positioned outside of my hands so I don't get too squirrely with it. We're learning together, right? This water tastes like yesterday. You know what does that make sense? Okay. I keep finding these cases where it starts with one missing person, but the further you dig into it, the more you find doesn't really add up and kind of has a little bit of mystery to it, or there's additional pieces that if you didn't really think to put them together that they might be related, or they might not even be related at all. And that's the situation that I've come to with this case. So I actually posted this on r/unresolved mysteries on Reddit. I will include my post below. If you're not a part of that community, it is awesome. They give you great feedback. They're super nice people, so I highly recommend going on there. So it's kind of good to, have it proofread and checked before you come onto a video, which I am learning, and I do appreciate that. The people I've met on Reddit are some of the nicest people ever. You also get some jerks, but I mean, you're putting yourself out there online, so really you can't. It is what it is, right? I mean, it's the internet. People are jerks, and some people are really nice. So my post was called Thinking Out Loud. 3 teenage girls are killed in Lynbrook, New York in 1984 and 1985. Were these crimes random, or is there a connection? And that's the part that I still cannot figure out. Luckily, the thing on Reddit is, though, if you're passionate about cold cases, like YouTube, Instagram, whatever, that's fine, because those are interesting to go to, too. But Reddit is where it's at. People are so passionate about solving these crimes, and they cite and source everything. There's no BS, and you're not allowed, there's moderators and there's rules, so you can't just start talking out your butt. It's all real information. Good to know. This started out because I found, her name is Jacqueline Martirella, her case is on Uncovered. And I started doing it, and while I was reading it, I noticed that 2 other people kind of just disappeared and were murdered around the same time. So let me set the scene for you. It's 1984 in Lynbrook, New York. Lynbrook is located on the south shore of Long Island, and our story starts on Tuesday, June 12th, 1984. We have a 15-year-old girl. Her name is Kelly Morrissey. She goes missing. From all accounts, Kelly was an average teenager. From her diary, which she kept, we know she had boyfriends. She dabbled in some drugs and alcohol. She skipped school occasionally. But she was still a good kid. It's just normal teenage behavior in my personal opinion. It's a time for people to experiment and figure out who they are. That's what teenagers are doing. A family member had said something like, she was no more rebellious than any other girls at the same age at the same time, and I would agree with that. To summarize kind of quickly what happened to Kelly, and this is the problem with Kelly's disappearance and why I don't know if this is one of the reasons why it was never solved. Not entirely sure. Kelly left her home to go hang out with her friends. She met a friend named Gail at the gas station near her house. She and Gail went to the gas station and were waiting for 2 older men to show up, but they never came. Kelly and Gail waited for over an hour, and according to Gail, Kelly left to go to a video parlor around 9:30 p.m. And that, according to Gail's story, was the last time anybody saw Kelly alive. The night of Kelly's disappearance, there were thunderstorms, and so when Kelly didn't return home, her mom didn't think that was that weird, because it was storming outside and Kelly walked everywhere, so her mom just assumed that she had gone and stayed the night at a friend's house and didn't want to walk home in the storm. Kelly was originally supposed to be home by 10 that evening, and of course she didn't show up. But like I said, her mom thought she stayed out because it was storming, and figured Kelly would come home after the storm was over. And after that, when she didn't show up, Kelly's mom reported her missing a little bit later. I saw in a different article that another one of Kelly's friends named Kim said that the story was a little bit different than how Gail described it. So I guess Kelly and Kim were friends, and Kim and Gail were friends, and Gail was friends with Kelly. So it's kind of like the trifecta of friends. At least that's what I am under the impression of. Not entirely sure. According to Kim's story, Gail got picked up by people at the gas station that Kelly didn't like and just left her there. This information didn't come out to police until several years later. As far as solving Kelly's disappearance goes, I think her case was given ample time and effort. Detective Terry Quinn of the Nassau County Police Department called over 100 names from Kelly's telephone book. He interviewed more than 1,000 people and walked 5 miles of the Long Island Beach Boardwalk every single day, when he worked, even when he didn't, looking for new leads on her case. When Kelly was too old for the Juvenile Aid Bureau to investigate, Detective Terry Quinn got taken off the case, and it was passed on to the homicide squad at that point. And even after Terry Quinn was taken off the case, he still used his free time to research her. That's a good dude. Unfortunately, I think I've read in an article that Terry Quinn has since passed away at the time of this filming, and I think at the time of one of the articles I read. But he spent every day up until his last one trying to figure out what happened to Kelly, which is really cool. The authorities and Kelly's parents do not think this was a runaway situation. It was one thing that was confirmed upon between everybody, that it was not a runaway situation. The night she disappeared, Kelly had laid out clothing for the next day. She took none of her personal belongings. She was supposed to pick up her paycheck from her job the next day, and she never showed up to pick up her paycheck. She also missed an important exam for her summer school classes, so she didn't show up for her exam either. And that is just, from what Kelly's family says, was completely out of character for her. Like, she had been dabbling in some things, but she was not about to throw her whole life away, and that's exactly what it seemed like it was doing. So they do not believe that this was a runaway situation. Authorities do believe, as well as her parents do believe, based off what we're going to talk about next, is that Kelly was, in fact, killed the night she went missing, and her body has just never been found. Everybody's collectively pretty much on board with that decision, which is really awful that we're probably never going to find Kelly. Back in 2010, Kelly's case was reopened because of some chatter on Facebook. The roller rink she and her friends frequented was called Hot Skates. Well, the post had attracted some attention to Kelly. I think there was some resurgence in Hot Skates. They made a Facebook page. Since then, the Facebook page is still open, but I think it's by new ownership, and the roller rink has been demolished. I saw it on the Facebook group page. The post is gone. There's still a site up. Excuse me. The site's still up, so you can go on Facebook and look at Hot Skates, but there's nothing relevant to Kelly's case or anything on there anymore. I think it's all been taken down, so I tried. Now here's where things get a little more tragic from where we already were. It's already very sad and upsetting, but now we're about to take one step further down into something more tragic. 5 months later, on November 10th, 1984, Theresa Fusco goes missing. Theresa works at Hot Skates. Theresa was friends with Kelly. Yeah. From what I've read and from what I know about the situation, which Theresa's timeline is a little bit easier to pinpoint than Kelly's was, Kelly has like the general story. You get the gist of it. My only concern about Kelly's story is that you don't know exactly where she was picked up, because you know she was probably walking. So you don't know, and you don't know who saw her last, right? You don't know who the last person to see Kelly was. You don't know where Kelly was headed, and you don't know where Kelly was picked up. Like, you don't even know Kelly's exact time of disappearance, which has to be so hard to try and pinpoint where it went missing, like where she went around. You don't even know where to look. You don't even know where to start looking, you know? Theresa's story is kind of a little more straightforward. I read a couple differing things here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Theresa had gotten fired that night. Theresa got into a fight with the assistant manager, was fired, and then made a phone call from the Hot Skates phone to an unknown person and then left. The assistant manager of Hot Skates didn't bother telling police this until 2012, which is kind of a long fucking time after the matter. So that's pretty cool. Good thing you helped. Not at all. Which, why he didn't come forward with this much sooner, I'm not entirely sure. But once again, everybody's like just fucking suspicious in this entire story. Like, everybody is just fucking sucks at being witnesses to crimes. People thought at the time that she might have ran away because she had gotten fired from her job. No. I'm gonna say that's a no. It's a hard no. She's a teenage girl. It just seems, you get fired. I don't know. It's like, it is what it is, right? Whatever. So Theresa had planned to visit her dad in Queens the next day, And Theresa's mom assumed that Theresa stayed at her friend's house after her shift because that was the original game plan. Theresa was going to go to work, get off work, and stay the night at her friend's house, then come home and go to Queens the next day to visit her dad. When Theresa didn't show up to go to her dad's house is when Theresa's mom got a little upset that she didn't know where her daughter was, and then Theresa's mom started calling around, and Theresa was nowhere to be found. Heighten the alarms. Theresa's body was discovered on December 5th in a wooded area of Lynbrook. She was completely nude and killed by ligature strangulation. In the New York Daily News that came out on December 7th, Theresa's body was found left on the north side of the tracks that was between Rockland Avenue and Park Place, which is unfortunately right outside of Hot Skates. I mean, maybe not like right outside the door, but it's basically like on the same street, across the street from Hot Skates. So she did not make it far. She was covered in leaves. DNA testing on her body showed that she had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. There's DNA evidence, but we'll get into that in a minute. Based off of decomposition, authorities believe she was killed the night she went missing. The night that Theresa went missing, a man named John French reported his tan Oldsmobile as stolen. It was parked relatively close to Hot Skates, practically where Theresa was last seen, and it was taken sometime between 9:30 and 11:05, which, if you remember, Theresa had been at work, and I think in the original timeline, and I'm stupid for not even including this, I think Theresa was fired and left her work at 9:15. So, the car was taken sometime between 9:30 and 11:05. Theresa quits her job, I'm going to estimate off memory, sometime between 9:15 and 9:30. The car, John French's car, was found a week later, about 1.5 miles away from the railroad tracks in a neighboring town called Lakeview. At this point, Theresa was still considered missing or a runaway because her body had not been found yet. When John French found his car, the windshield of the car was smashed and license plates had been changed. Inside the car were a pair of women's striped jeans. They were under the passenger seat with one leg turned inside out. John French had had rope in the back seat before the car was taken, and it was gone when the car was found. John reported these facts when Theresa's body was found, and he rightly so, since the two cases might be related. Police processed the car. Hair was found that was, and I'm purely summarizing, between 50 and 100% similar to the deceased, which was Theresa, after her body was found. Police had also shown John French some evidence from the crime scene, like a bit of rope and some other items, and he said they belonged to him. So one of the biggest things I read on Reddit about this bit of the conversation, could John French be involved? Are you ready for this? The rope was never tested for any type of DNA because it was found, the rope found at the crime scene that originally was presumably in John French's car was found at the crime scene, was never tested for any DNA, any evidence at all. And it eventually went missing. All out, just completely went missing. The jeans were discarded inadvertently. It seems, from what I've read, that the lead detective on this case was the only person who knew about the connection and the only person that knew about these items, and they went missing. Interesting, right? We'll come back to that. On March 26th, 1985, 19-year-old Jacqueline Martirella disappeared. She was found on April 22nd by a Lynbrook resident looking for gold golf balls in a marshy area of the Woodmere Country Club golf course. Her body was fully nude and she was badly decomposed. She was in a swampy area next to a dead tree about halfway down the fair lane of the 17th hole. Jacqueline, at the time of her disappearance, had been on her way to her job at Burger King. She left her friend's house at 7:35 to make the 15-minute walk to get there. Her shift started at 8, but Jackie never showed up. And that was odd because Jackie was known to be 20 to 30 minutes early to her shift every time, and she never missed shifts. She was saving up to buy her first car. She had just bought, I think it was a CD player. She was a working girl, proud of her job, proud of what she did, a good employee. Even her assistant manager said that she was like a star, the perfect employee to have. So at 8:15, when she didn't show up to work, she was walking. The assistant manager of BK called to ask where she was. Like, is she sick? Is she running late? Like, where is Jackie? And I call her Jackie affection. I don't know if I should be calling her Jackie. I've been calling her Jackie since I started researching this, so I just, in my head, think of her as Jackie. But Jacqueline, police believe that she was kidnapped while walking to work and most likely murdered that night as well. After Jacqueline's body was found, police set up a mobile crime scene van near the Burger King in hopes that somebody who might have seen something, like seen her walking to work, might have seen something that happened, but they got no response from that. Of course, authorities pieced together the similarities between, the 2 and the 3 girls. Theresa and Jacqueline's murders were very similar as far as locale, MO. They were both sexually assaulted before the death and were found nude. They were both found in open areas and not well concealed. When you add Kelly into the mix, all 3 were young Caucasian females who were last seen walking alone in the evening, and Kelly and Theresa were known to have some type of relationship to each other. I'm still not sure exactly what their relationship was. I don't know if they were just acquaintances or how close they were or where like Gail and Kim fall on the scale, but I also know that teenage girls are fickle. I was one, so I mean, teenage girl could be best friends with one person one day and then hate that person the next day. Believe me, that's how teenage girls are. So, I mean, I don't know how close any of these people were. But back to the DNA evidence from before, because I did say we had DNA evidence, and I'm going to give that its full due, because we do have DNA evidence. Police completely fucked this up, but we do have DNA evidence in this case, which is still available to my understanding. So, enter John Cogut, Dennis Halstead, and John Restivo. From the article I cited, which would be below, Kelly knew all 3 and all 3 knew each other. All the police would say about Kelly's connection to John Restivo is that his last name was in her phone book. According to Kim, Kelly was interested in him. Dennis Halstead was the oldest, about 29 years old, married, and had a bit of a sketchy reputation. You think? Kelly, Gail, and Kim would hang out at his Atlantic Avenue apartment, which is a 10 to 15 minute walk away from the gas station that Kelly went missing from, as did other teenagers. They drink and smoke weed. Gail apparently lived in the same building at the time, and both she and Kelly evidently dated him. A little bit suspicious, if you ask me, because those boys knew Kelly, and Kelly knew Theresa, who both these girls are missing now, missing and presumed dead and presumed dead. Police were interested, and I mean, rightly so, I'll give them that. Add into the situation the general idea that these men were a little sketchy, a married 29-year-old man sleeping with and sharing drugs and alcohol with teenage girls. I think a little sketchy does not begin to cover the situation, but that's my own personal opinion. Cogut was apparently a volatile boyfriend. So John Cogut was subjected to 3 polygraphs. Why John was singled out as this ringleader of the gang, I'm not entirely sure. I also don't know what the questioning processes looked like or what anybody had told anybody. But it does really seem like they went right in on John right off the rip. They were like, we're questioning you, and they pinned him as this ringleader of the group, which I don't know if that's a valid assessment of anything. So John Cogut, back to that, sorry, I went away. John Cogut was subject to 3 polygraph tests. He was told he failed them. I don't know whether he did or didn't fail them. It's unknown. It was never said anywhere whether he failed them or not. So he was told he failed them, but he still maintained his innocence. He was like, no, I didn't do it, so I don't know what to tell you guys. However, 3 failed polygraph tests were enough for the police to go for gold. And I think it might be possible the other 2 passed their polygraph tests, or they just really... With this whole investigation, you're about to get there with me, this whole investigation seems fucked. And so I really don't know what their reasoning was. And I don't even know if they had a reason, to be completely honest with you. So they might not have even... They were just like, this guy, totally cool. So they interrogated John for 18 hours. And then John confessed. I mean... Yeah, it might be one of those situations where you interrogate someone for literally almost a full day, and then they tell you whatever you want to hear to get out of it. I mean, how many times have we seen that in the history of confessions? I mean, I wonder if there's not more of that happening. That, whatever, fine. I'll get off, I'm not on my pedestal. The confession was handwritten by the interrogation officer and then signed by Cogut, and even though allegedly there were 5 previous versions of the confession that happened before the transcription ever occurred. They took John Cogut to the crime scene, and he had no idea if anything was missing or present or what. I mean, he didn't fucking know. So the following day, they recorded his confession on videotape, but it had no details of anything that wasn't already known by law enforcement. I obviously haven't seen the recorded confession, but this is all giving me, like, very much setup vibes of, like, he's confessing to something that I don't think he did. Just because you're not a great person does not mean you're a murderer, but whatever. In John's confession, he said that Restivo, Halstead, and himself were all in Restivo's van. They came up on Theresa, who was on foot, and picked her up. At some point, she wandered out of the van, and instead they stopped, stripped her, and she was allegedly raped by Restivo and Halstead. Then they drove to a cemetery where the victim was taken out of the van, and John Cogut strangled her with a piece of rope. She was then rolled into a blanket and dumped in another location. Based off of that confession, Restivo's van was searched, and police found several hairs that were tested in the forensics lab. An analyst testified that 2 hairs found in the front passenger seat were microscopically similar to those of the victim. And, quote, in this particular instance, that the questioned hair could have originated from the scalp of Theresa Fusco with a high degree of probability. However, as you know, fiber evidence isn't admissible in court anymore. I don't know when that officially started, but you can't use a hair or a fiber or something to convict somebody off of. You can submit it as evidence if it helps tell your story, but you can't convict somebody off of that. It's not cool. It's not cool, dude. You can't do that anymore, right? So how this case even went forward, I'm not even sure. But yeah, no, you cannot, fun fact, you cannot convict somebody off of fiber evidence. Put that in your pocket. DNA testing went on for over 10 years, even though all 3 men were excluded numerous times. Prosecution said this was solely because that the samples weren't of the best quality, and it was possible that there wasn't a detectable amount of semen on the samples. So basically prosecution was trying to say that they were getting false negatives on the sample because there wasn't enough DNA in the samples to get a reading of who it would be. So that's what they're trying to say, is that it was just false negatives, like, whatever. So annoying. In 2003, the defense finally obtained property records from the police department, and they found out there was, in fact, an intact vaginal swab that had never been tested. And based off of this swab matched the DNA from the original test that they had run, and the DNA on this test excluded all 3 of them. Again, it's beyond a reasonable doubt that they didn't do it. The DNA that they have with the body does not match the 3 men they arrested for it. End of story. You got the wrong guy, right? You have DNA evidence for somebody. It's out there. Not the people you put in jail. And you want to know what's even crazier than that? The hairs found in the van all had post-mortem root banding, which only happens to the hairs while they're still attached to a corpse that has been dead for at least 8 hours, if not days or weeks. The hair found in the van was suspiciously similar to the hair that was taken from Theresa's body during the autopsy. Huh. Isn't that odd? Either way, because obviously they didn't know this back then, either way, the men were charged with the rape and murder of Theresa. I don't know if they're lumping Kelly into this or if they're lumping Jacqueline into this. Not entirely sure. Obviously, the discrepancies in evidence weren't present at the time and were figured out later, but in 1986, all 3 were convicted. Cogut himself received 25 years to life on 2 counts of murder and 12 to 25 years for the rape conviction, meaning Cogut was going to serve 31 years in prison. Halstead and Restivo had similar sentences. And my question here, though, was if John Cogut said that Halstead and Restivo were the ones that committed the sexual assault, and there was no evidence that pointed to Cogut, or the others, for that matter, why was the SA added to Cogut's sentence unless, like, he's just guilty by association and they just lumped it on there too? I'm not really sure. In 2003, all the convictions were overturned. 17 years after the fact for Restivo and Halstead, and John Cogut ended up spending 19 years in prison for this. Restivo and Halstead were released then with their cases dismissed so they could never be retried. So John Cogut was retried. The prosecution tried to say that because Theresa was known to be a virgin, that she must have had some consensual sex with somebody, an unknown male, before her rape and murder, which explained the DNA match, that it didn't match any of them. The defense was able to provide the evidence that the confession was false, and also that's just a maniac. Tell me you're desperate to pin this on somebody without telling me you're desperate to pin this on somebody, right? So eventually John Cogut was acquitted in 2005. So some important questions. My big question is, why is this not solved? What are we missing? And this is in no particular order. 1. Blood type testing was never performed on the semen. This would have been a game changer. And although it's obviously not perfect, a blood typing may have been able to keep Cogut, Restivo, and Halstead from being convicted. And it might have given you an idea of a direction of looking at somebody who actually killed these girls instead of the wrong people. 2. Police were under a lot of pressure to solve these crimes because of Kelly's disappearance and the subsequent murders that happened afterwards. So I get that there was a lot of pressure on the police to solve this crime. They mishandled it. On a side note, I find it very unfortunate that Theresa and Jacqueline didn't have somebody like Detective Terry Quinn on their case, because he gave Kelly's case so much love and devotion, and he really wanted that to be solved, and it's really upsetting that there weren't more police like him in this situation, because had there been more police like him in this situation, it probably would have been solved by now. Third issue. Too many variations on the story of the night that Kelly Morrissey went missing. I feel it's hard to pin down, and I said this earlier, I think it's hard to pin down who was the last person to see her, where she was at the time she went missing. Did Gail have something to hide? Why would she be uncooperative? Which I added a 3.5. Cogut and his friends were an easy target for someone like this to be pinned on. Even if they didn't commit these exact crimes, from what I read, these men were not perfect, and they weren't. They possibly had other things they were looking to hide, which made them appear dodgier, right? They had other issues. They were giving drugs and alcohol to minors. Is it possible that Gail, Kelly, Kim's friends had something to hide for the same reason? Like drinking, drug use? There's a bunch of sketchy things involved in here because they were hanging out with kind of sketchy people. So I think these people were acting dodgy, and it may not be nefarious. The reason why they're being dodgy might not be nefarious at all. It might just be that they had other hobbies that they didn't want the police to know about. It's hard to know exactly why they were arrested, and that their dodgy behavior might have been the reason why they got arrested in the first place. 3.75, another random thought. Exactly how close were Theresa and Kelly? Every article I read says they were friends, but how good of friends were they? Were they BFFs? Were they acquaintances? And another question, would Theresa have known possibly what happened to Kelly? Did Kelly confide in anybody? Did Theresa confide in anybody? I don't know. Number 4. Real evidence being concealed because they were so focused on connecting this crime to Cogut. What happened to the missing evidence? What happened to John French? What happened to his car? What we have learned of this evidence had been evaluated. I don't know, because it's all gone now, so you could never know. There was another post that I read about this being the Long Island serial killer in his original days. I don't really buy that. I know, and somebody had commented it on the Reddit post, that MO can change over time, which is fair. That's fair. Because my original statement was that the MO of these crimes do not match the Long Island serial killer in later times. But now, I do realize that your MO can change over time. And I guess I didn't really think about that when I wrote that. So it could still be... I personally don't think it's the Long Island serial killer. There's a handful of people out there that think it could be. Either way, it would still be unsolved, so I guess die on whatever hill you want to die on, because either way, it's going to be unsolved. Number 6. Were these young women targeted for a specific reason, i.e. their relationship to Kelly, or was it all completely random? Since it's ruled out that John Cogut and friends committed this crime, who else could be responsible? I don't know. If you would like to come down this rabbit hole, one that I've already started, just go to Reddit. Final thoughts. 3 girls go missing in Lynbrook in 1984 and 1985. I don't know what to make of this case, because I don't know if Theresa and Kelly actually knew each other. I don't know if Jackie was part of the mix. I know that 3 men got convicted for it and they were not guilty. I know that there's DNA evidence out there that matches somebody. So my final thoughts are, I think that this is just so close to being figured out. And it just hasn't been because that right piece of information has not been slotted into place yet. And I think given the right piece of information, this could be solved. Anyway, thanks for spending some time with me today, and I hope that you learned something. I hope that maybe you know something. And I hope that these girls get the justice they deserve. If you like what I do, or you want to be a part of the gang, you can like this video, comment below, subscribe. I'm just trying to get more attention brought to cold cases. That's the only point of this, and the only way I'm ever going to get that is if I get some type of platform. So here's to helping unsolved crimes get solved. And yeah, that's what I got. I will see you next week, and I hope you all have a great week between now and then. If you want daily content, I post every day, well, for the most part, every day on Instagram. I'm at Cabernet and True Crime. I respond to everybody who messages me, unless you're a spam robot. But for the most part, I respond to everybody. So if you have anything you want to talk about, you have a cold case you want me to talk about, I'm there to talk about your cold cases. That's kind of my jam. So that's all I got for you, and catch you later.